Thank you. Let's hear it for Candace and Kirby. Thank you for being here. Nice little duet there. Thank you as well to our guys in the booth and tech people all around. Zach and Colin and who's up there? Aaron and Samuel. And we appreciate all you guys that make sure everything happens each and every week. And thank you all for being here. I'm excited. When Pastor Darren asked me, I guess a month or more ago, if I'd be willing to do this, I jumped right all over it. Very thankful to get to be here to share with you guys. And I know y'all have been going through kind of a study the past couple of weeks, right? Pastor Darren's kind of done a little small series a couple of weeks on close encounters with Jesus, right? Some people who have come face to face with Jesus and had an encounter with Him. I know one week you all talked about, was it the woman at the well one week? About how she had an encounter with Jesus, and then there was a blind man who had an encounter with Jesus as well. And I asked Pastor Dan if it was okay if we kind of continued with that theme a little bit and talked a little bit more about close encounters with Jesus tonight, and he said it'd be great. So we're going to look at that again tonight. We're going to look at somebody who had a close encounter with Jesus, in fact, multiple close encounters with Jesus, and what we can learn from that. All right, but first of all, this made me think of something, and I don't know, Noah's back there. Noah was a part of Merge, and I don't know if anybody else in here was. Candace maybe, Zach was, and stuff. This may be something you've seen before. I don't remember how many years. It might have been like 5 or 6 years ago that I used these things. But people have often claimed to have close encounters with Jesus. Some have claimed to have been face-to-face with Jesus, right? Have you ever heard of any of those encounters? Here's some people who have claimed that they have seen Jesus' face. They've seen Him face to face. Here's somebody who claims they saw Jesus' face. Right here. That'd be for the next slide. There we go. In their x-ray. Do you see Jesus? Do you see what they're talking about? Kind of right there in the middle. Do you kind of see the outline? Do you see the two eyes and kind of the nose and the beard and the hair? Some people, when people said they've asked Jesus into their heart, these people took it literally. And they said, I have Jesus inside my life. Here's somebody else. Here's another. I think this is another x-ray. This is an ultrasound of a baby. Do you see that? That spot? They said that was Jesus. Here's another one. Here's somebody whose ultrasound, it looks like Jesus. Oh, he's laying his head on the baby's shoulder. Do you see it? Who can see it? Can you kind of see his face, kind of see him? He's kind of leaning his head over on the baby's head and shoulder and stuff there. Those people think they've had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus. Here's somebody else. Not just in, this is another ultrasound. That's kind of like the other one. Go to the next one. Some people have found Jesus in their food. I don't know if that's a pancake or what. Do you see Jesus' face in there? They get all excited. Jesus is in my pizza dough or whatever. There's the next one. I don't even know what that is, but they see Jesus' face in that bread or whatever. Do you see it? Here's another one. Do you see Jesus in their Kit Kat bar? Huh? Do you see Him? Come on, give me a break, right? Get it? Give me a break. It's a Kit Kat bar? Never mind. Okay, the next one. How about Jesus in your banana? People claim, man, that's Jesus. He's in my banana. The next one. How about Jesus is in my bottle top? I don't know if that's jelly or barbecue sauce. She looks like she's eating toast, so maybe it's a jelly top or something. She's all proud of that. The next one. Keep moving. And sometimes Jesus appears in nature, like in this broken bark on a tree. The next one. Oh, this one's funny. This lady was speaking at church and Jesus showed up to listen, but he hid behind the trees. You see him over there? Do you see it? They claim, that's Jesus right there. He was there with me when I was speaking. The next one. Jesus, do you see him? In Revelations it says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, behold, I am the door. In fact, it does. Jesus said once, I am the door. And if anybody here, so literally, Jesus is the door. The next one. How about Jesus is in your countertop? Those are drawers. It's not door. It's kind of looking down on your granite countertop. I guess that makes sense too. Jesus did say He was the rock, right? So next one. Jesus is in your tree trunk. He's in there somewhere. It's kind of, that one's kind of iffy to me. He's in there somewhere. They kind of say, I can see the beard. It looks like somebody shot him right between the eyes, though. Right there. Next one. That one's freaky to me. That's the root system of a plant that somebody pulled up, a bush. It looks like they said it's Jesus with the crown of thorns and everything. See it? Next one. Jesus is in my wooden plank. The next one. Jesus is even in the dew frost window on my car. That's a pretty good one. If somebody didn't, that to me almost looks like somebody drew that one. That one's almost too good. The next one. Then Jesus it shows up in animals too. In a turtle shell. The bottom of the turtle. That turtle has Jesus in his shell. The next one. How about Jesus on my stingray or whatever that is? Do you see it? That's kind of freaky. Next one. Jesus is in my sweeping up the sawdust. Do you see it? That's weird. Next, Jesus is in my greasy oil spill on the floor. That one's pretty good too. That one makes me almost think somebody did that on purpose. Another one. Jesus is on my Walmart receipt. How about that? That was a holy purchase right there. And another one. Jesus is in my torn jeans, maybe. And then this guy, the next one. Jesus is in my frying pan. He even got his suit on and everything. Man, he went to church and showed everybody. These people all feel like they've had face-to-face encounters with Jesus. Here's another guy.
I'm not having a mental breakdown. I see Jesus.
No, you see nothing because it's your brain making it up because that's what your brain does.
Poor fella. He saw Jesus. He had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus and his friend wouldn't believe him, would he? Have any of y'all ever experienced that? Think about it. And that was some silly pictures and all of that. But those are real people who have claimed they've submitted those photos. They've told people that Jesus appeared to them in their Walmart receipt or in their greasy skillet. But have you ever, at times, tried to share with friends, family, or whatever, and said, man, I've had this encounter with Jesus. And they just kind of thought, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't know if you've really seen or been with or heard from Jesus or not. Right? Do you see how that could happen, though? That when we really feel like we've met Jesus, we've talked to him, encountered him, whatever, then sometimes people may look at us and say, I don't see it. I don't see what you're seeing. I don't understand. The person we're going to talk about tonight kind of experienced that a little bit. All right? And that person that we're going to talk about, since this past Sunday was Easter, I want to look at somebody who had an encounter with Jesus that was a part of the Easter story. In fact, this person was the very first person to see Jesus after his resurrection. Anybody know who that was? This is the interactive part. Somebody has to say it. Who knows? Shout it out. Anybody? Who was the very first person to see Jesus resurrected? Mary Magdalene. That's exactly right. Some of you knew that. Mary Magdalene. So we're going to talk about Mary Magdalene a little bit and her encounters with Jesus. So the past couple of weeks, y'all have been looking at that. So we're going to look at Mary Magdalene. Now, it's evident from Scripture that Mary Magdalene, and there were some other women too, who were part of the disciples. Now, when we say the disciples of Jesus, how many are we talking about? You're kind of afraid to say it, aren't you? Normally we think of how many? 12. Did you know there were actually hundreds of disciples of Jesus? There were at one point there was 70 disciples of Jesus who he sent out. There were men disciples and women disciples. There were followers and disciples of Jesus. Now there was a special group of 12 that he named and called as a special group. He gave them kind of another title too. Does anybody remember the other title they called? Apostles, right. He called them the apostles. Now, but from the very beginning, there was a group of women, and Mary Magdalene was one of them, that were an important part of Jesus' ministry. And they traveled with him. They were part of his traveling team. We don't know the actual timeline, but in Luke chapter 4, we're not going to go there in turn, but in Luke chapter 4, Jesus begins his ministry. That's after he goes to the Jordan River and John baptizes him. He goes out into the desert and he's tempted for 40 days. And then he shows up and he begins his ministry. That's in Luke chapter 4. Then in Luke chapter 5, he calls his first disciples. That's when he starts going by the seashore and there's some guys fishing. You remember those stories? And then in Luke chapter, so that's 4, 5, chapter 6 is when he names those special 12. Jesus goes up for a time of prayer and he comes back down and he looks at all these people who are following him, these group of disciples, and he calls out 12 of them. He starts naming them, Peter, Andrew, James, John. He starts naming these 12 and calls them his apostles. This is his special group, but there's still this whole other group that's following along, and they're disciples too. Then in the beginning of Luke chapter 8, now I know this isn't a direct timeline, we don't know how much time has passed or anything, but in the beginning of Luke chapter 8, there's this group of women who are named and mentioned, and one of them is Mary Magdalene. So it's safe to assume that Mary Magdalene, she must have had a close encounter with Jesus pretty early in his ministry, right? We don't know how many times. She lived in a town called Magdala, which is very close up on the Sea of Galilee. It's very close to Capernaum, where Jesus based his ministry out of. In fact, it's not maybe a 20, 25, 30-minute walk, maybe, just around the beach a little bit there in Israel. To Magdala. It was on one of the main roads. If Jesus was traveling from Capernaum to Nazareth, his hometown, or back and forth, he would have had to go through Magdala. Was a normal stop there. So we don't know when she first met Jesus, but we know pretty early in the ministry she had a close encounter with Jesus enough that she began following. She began being a part of this little group because this encounter with Jesus obviously changed her life. And this put her in position. This initial encounter with Jesus kind of put her in a position where she began to have more encounters with Jesus. Okay? Now, that's the thing I want to ask you about tonight and think about, is this. Some of you have been here over the past few weeks, and Pastor Darren's talked about these close encounters with Jesus that people have had. Some of you may have asked the question, when I think about those stories, one of the things I think of is, how can that be me? How can I have a close encounter with Jesus? If maybe I've already had an initial, how can I continue to have encounters with Jesus? Okay? I want us to learn some things from Mary Magdalene tonight that I think is kind of a key and a clue to those of us who maybe, and I don't know, all of your all's lives and stuff, maybe every one of you in here has already had an encounter with Jesus. Okay? If you've had an initial encounter with Jesus and you claim to be following Jesus, how can you continue to have more encounters with Jesus? Or tonight, you might be somebody who's never really had a first encounter with Jesus. How can that happen? And I think there's some truths we can learn from Mary Magdalene to figure that out, okay? And let's go, I want to read from Luke chapter 8, the first little part here that I think gives us our first truth, okay, that puts us in position, okay? So in Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, and then we're going to bounce to another scripture as well, but we're going to jump to a couple of times of Mary Magdalene. So this is where it talks about Jesus' little traveling team. Verse 1, soon afterward, he, which is Jesus, went on through cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. And the 12 were with him. Now those 12 are the 12 who? The apostles. Those are the 12 special guys. So the 12 were with him, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. So some of these women that traveled along were also some women who he had healed. Okay? One of them, it says, Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. And Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager. And Susanna and many others. So there's several women. And then look what it says about them. It says, many others, who provided for them out of their means. They provided for them out of their means. So let's talk about what that means, but I think that indicates the first truth tonight. The first truth that I think we can learn from Mary Magdalene in us setting ourselves up and being in the place where we can have encounters with Jesus is, first truth is we have to be invested. We have to be invested in Jesus. Now, that last verse that we read there, verse 3, said that Mary Magdalene and these other women provided for them out of their what? their means. They provided for them out of their means. This indicates that probably, obviously, these women must have had some sort of finances. They provided out of their means. That word means properties or possessions. So Jesus and this team, this ministry team, is traveling around. Have you ever wondered about that? With Jesus and these guys and these women, as he's traveling around teaching and preaching, have you ever thought and wondered, okay, where did he get food? How did he pay for food? How did they pay their bills? How did they pay for night's lodging, maybe if they stayed in a hotel or something? I don't know. But have you ever wondered about that? Where did the finances come from for him to go around and minister? We know that he was a carpenter's son and that he also was a carpenter, but when he got to the age of 30 years old, he left all of that and went to full-time ministry, right? So somehow they had to be provided for. This group had to eat, had to sleep, had to have their clothes fixed, had to have new, whatever, stuff's going to wear out. Where did that come from? Well, one indication is from here that these women helped provide out of their means. So somehow these women had some kind of source of income. Whether they were widows that had money left to them from their husbands passed away. Maybe it was women whose husbands worked and they were able to contribute through these women to the ministry of Jesus. We really don't know exactly how that happened. But somehow these women invested in Jesus. Financially, yes, but I think it means more than that too. I think it also means that they invested their time because they traveled with him, didn't they? So they invested, they said, Jesus, I'm going to give you my time. I'm going to spend my time hanging around with Jesus. They also invested, I think, probably in their talents, which means the stuff that they could do. I'm sure that these women, as they traveled around, not only did they have the money to help buy bread and stuff, they also probably helped prepare it and fix it, right? They probably cooked some food for them. Maybe they camped at night or something, and these women, maybe they did the cooking. Maybe if their clothes got old and wore out, maybe they took and bought patches of cloth, and maybe they helped. So, and now girls, don't hear me saying the only way you can serve Jesus is to cook and sew. Okay? I don't mean that at all. Because guys, some of y'all can cook and sew too, right? There you go. But somehow these women, this group of women who traveled around with Jesus, and Mary Magdalene was one of them, they invested in Jesus. Their time, their talents, and their treasures. You've heard that probably in our church. Sometimes we say that. Pastor Steve says that quite often. That we give to Jesus is not just in the offering plate, put money in. It's given of our treasures, yes, but also our time and our talents. So that's a question for us tonight. If I want to have encounters with Jesus, how invested am I in Jesus? Am I investing in the things that matter to Jesus? Am I giving? Am I sacrificing? Am I giving of my time? Am I giving of my abilities, my talents, my skills, my energies? It doesn't have to be even considered a talent. Am I willing to serve and to do things for Jesus? To give him my time, my energy. When people do that, like Mary Magdalene, when they do that, when they give of their time, their talents, their treasures, they invest in Jesus, guess what they get? They get close encounters with Jesus. They get to experience him. Okay? So that's the first thing, is to be invested in Jesus. Okay? The next truth is found in, we're going to jump a little bit in Luke to chapter 23. If we jump to chapter 23 in Luke, we see Mary Magdalene in another experience as they're traveling with Jesus and stuff, okay? Now, Luke 23, we're going to jump to the verses 55, 56 around in there, but if you're looking in your Bibles ahead of that, if you know what's going on, this is where Jesus is being crucified. This is led up into all of that. Jesus has been crucified. He's died on the cross, okay? And now we see that Jesus' body's being taken down, and we see this happening because then, do you remember when Jesus' body was taken down, who claimed his body? Little Bible quiz now. Who claimed the body of Jesus? Say it. I'm an old man. You have to say it where I can hear it. Who took the body of Jesus to bury it? Who? Well, they were not any of the 12. Oh, I thought somebody'd pull that out. There you go. Okay, good. Joseph of Arimathea. It was Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. These were two guys who were a part of the Sanhedrin Council, but they were, the Bible tells us, they were secret followers of Jesus. They were a part of the religious group of Jews, but they were also followers of Jesus in secret. But then when he died, they suddenly decided, we're not going to be secret disciples anymore. They came out and they claimed the body of Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea was one of those. Joseph actually had a tomb that was close by to where he was crucified, and he gave of his tomb. Nobody had ever been in it before, and he said, I'm going to give of my tomb and let Jesus be in, put Jesus there. Okay? So that's what's happening. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus have claimed the body of Jesus, and then we get to verses 55 and 56. It says, the women, and this group of women, if we looked up above some other verses, Mary Magdalene was a part of this group. Okay? The women who had come with him from Galilee followed, who did they follow? Well, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. They've taken the body down and they're taking it to the tomb. They're carrying his body, and these women are following. Got the picture? So they followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they, which means the women, Mary Magdalene, one of them, then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. Okay? You get the picture there? These women have been there at the cross. The other disciples did what when Jesus was being crucified? They left. They ran. They hid, right? We don't know how far. We know at some point John was close by enough because Jesus talked to him from the cross and told him to take care of his mom. Remember that? But these women stayed there. These women were there. When Jesus' body was taken off the cross and they were taking it to bury, Mary Magdalene and this group of women, they followed. They wanted to see where he was. That leads me to this next truth. The next truth, I believe, if you want to have encounters with Jesus, you have to be invested, but you also have to be intentional. The next thing I want us to see is we need to be intentional. Go to the next slide. There you go. Be intentional. Now, by intentional, that means we're doing things on purpose, right? We're making a decision to do things. Intentional, I intended to do that. That means I planned it. I chose to do it. It wasn't an accident. It didn't just happen. I intended to do it. I think we have to be intentional. Mary Magdalene did what she did, and these other women, they did what they did on purpose. They followed on purpose. They chose to follow the men as they took Jesus' body to the tomb. They made sure they knew exactly the place where it was laid. You remember that part in the verses? That they looked and they saw the tomb and how his body was laid. So they intentionally followed. They intentionally watched on purpose. And then they made a plan to return and anoint his body. Remember, it says that they returned and prepared spices and ointments. They made a plan that they were going to help and be a part of this. Okay? That was all planned and all intentional. They followed on purpose. They just didn't happen to be going that way. They followed on purpose. They watched on purpose to see where he was at. Exactly which tomb. It may have been several tombs around. We want to know exactly which tomb, exactly where in the tomb, because a lot of times these tombs, these little caves they buried people, probably had several different places that you could put bodies. So they wanted to know exactly which tomb and exactly where Jesus was laid. They were intentional on doing that on purpose. And then they went back, and on purpose they were preparing spices and ointments because they were going to come back after the Sabbath, after Passover. They were going to come back and anoint his body, right? They were intentional. They did what they did on purpose. You know, when sometimes we look at that story, I don't think Mary looked at that and she said, well, if something comes up and I'm not too busy, I'll do this for Jesus. Do you read that in the story anywhere? It's not that. She was intentional, making a plan to come back and anoint the body. There was no wavering. There was no, you know what? We got the Passover. If nothing comes up on Sunday morning, we'll go do this at the tomb. There was a plan, okay? Let me ask you this. That leads to a question about us. How intentional are you in following Jesus? How intentional are we? How much do we live our lives each and every day on purpose to follow Jesus, to be with him? Do we make it a plan? Do we make a plan at some point every day? That Jesus, I'm going to spend time with you every day. And so we plan it out. maybe, that kind of leads me to, okay, things like, do you plan a special time during the day when you're going to read your Bible or pray or study the Bible? A quiet time. We throw that word or that phrase around a lot and stuff. But do you during every day, or at least during the week sometime, are there intentional plans that you make on purpose? Not just accidentally hoping, saying, okay, Jesus, I go to church on Sunday morning. I go to church on Wednesday night. And then maybe as I'm going through the week, if I bump into you, cool. If I bump into an opportunity, if I'm walking down the road or riding on the bus or driving in the car and I see a billboard with a Bible verse on it, cool, I got to read my Bible this week. Is that how we're kind of living our relationship with Jesus, or are we intentional? Do we make it a plan? Do we say, I'm going to follow on purpose? I'm going to watch. I'm going to see. I'm going to look for Him. And then I'm going to make plans. I'm going to schedule it. These women did. They went back. They got the ointment stuff ready, and they scheduled it. All these women said, hey, look, Sunday morning, sun up, we're meeting right here, and we're all going to the tomb to anoint the body. There was a plan. Are we intentional in following Jesus? People who are intentional, people who follow Jesus on purpose, guess what? They get to have close encounters with Jesus. They get to meet Him and talk to Him and see Him, and not just in your toast or in a board or on a turtle shell. You get to spend time with Jesus and have close encounters with Him, okay? The last one is this. The final truth is, number 3, if you want to have close encounters with Jesus, you have to be invested, you have to be intentional, and you have to be in the right place. You have to be in the right place, okay? Let's look at a couple more things with Mary. We're going to jump to the book of John now, John chapter 19. And we're going to look again at the crucifixion of Jesus, and we kind of hinted at this a little bit. In John chapter 19, verse 25, there's one verse I want to look at there that says this. But standing by the cross of Jesus were who? His mother, his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and who? Mary Magdalene. Where was Mary Magdalene when Jesus was being crucified? Where does it say she was? Standing by the cross. Boy, that would be a whole gospel church sermon right there, buddy. Standing by the cross. We should be standing by the cross of Jesus like Mary was, right? But that's a pretty important thing. Mary Magdalene was in the right place. She was where she needed to be, where she was supposed to be. And sometimes, and think about this situation, sometimes being in the right place is hard. Do you think it was easy for Mary to be next to the cross of Jesus while He's being crucified? Do you think it was easy to be anywhere around the crucifixion of crosses? I don't know what you studied or heard or learned or seen in movies or videos or books or cartoons or whatever when we've visualized paintings, pictures of the crucifixion of Jesus. Most don't get it right historically. When Jesus was crucified, a lot of times we think of it way up on a hill, right? On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross. It probably wasn't up on a hill. That's not the way the Romans did things. It was where a hill was. But the Romans, the way they crucified people, is they took one of the main roads going in and out of town, one of the main roads. It'd be almost like us going out at Nashville Highway here, Highway 31, going from here to Spring Hill. And they would line the side of the road with crosses. The main road where the most traffic is, where people are going to pass by. That's where they crucified criminals. Why? Because they wanted people to see it. Out in the public, where everybody could see, everybody passing by, as a deterrent to always obey Roman law, right? So probably when Jesus was crucified, first of all, we know that when He was crucified with how many others? 2. There was a thief on either side of Him. Now, also we have to understand at that point, that doesn't mean they were the only guys on crosses. That means when it says that about that Jesus was crucified with two criminals, one on his right and one on his left, that means at the time that they took Jesus out, he wasn't the only one. They were taken, obviously 3 trials were over, 3 guys were condemned, and 3 guys were taken out, and they were nailed to put on crosses and put up all at the same time. Nailed to crosses. Okay? And sometimes, I don't know if you've seen pictures or have you ever seen pictures or videos or movies or anything where the other 2 guys got tied to the cross and Jesus was the only one that got nailed? Have you ever seen that? That is totally not, that's not accurate at all. The Romans didn't pick out Jesus and do him special. They did all of them the same way. They nailed every one of them to the crosses. You see, to these Roman soldiers, when we hear the story of the crucifixion, we pick out Jesus, and it's very special to us, isn't it? To those Roman soldiers, they didn't know who this guy was. They didn't care, because this is what they did all day long, every day, was they took criminals out to the edge of the city on the side of the road, they nailed them to crosses and hung them up and left them to die. Chances are when these guys took Jesus, they didn't know who he was. They didn't have a clue. They weren't part of the trial or anything. There wasn't some big halo glowing around Jesus and angels that made him special. When they took Jesus out, they didn't know they were taking the Son of God. They didn't know they were taking this guy that claimed to be the Messiah. He was just another criminal that they took out. Chances are there were other criminals already hanging on crosses that day. And then they nailed up Jesus and these other 2 and threw them up as well. So that's an ugly, hard place to be, especially for women. It was a scary place for women too. You want to know why? These Roman soldiers that were trained to crucify people, the Roman executioners, if you study history, it's not in the Bible, but Bible and history, a lot goes together, right? If you study old Roman history back from the 1st century, these guys were the most ruthless, savage, trained individuals. They were actually so mean and ruthless that they couldn't even be regular soldiers. The Romans would not even keep them in the regular army to go out and fight battles because these guys were so out of control, wild, maniac, mean people. They were brutes. They were terrible. So they made executioners out of them. And they weren't very nice guys, especially to women. Hanging around where these brutes were was not safe for women. They could have very easily been grabbed by these soldiers and mistreated. But Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, and some other women were there. It was the right place to be. Sometimes following Jesus puts you in some hard places, doesn't it? It puts you in some uncomfortable places. It may put you in some dangerous places, right? Where you may be the only one. When they were standing next to that cross of Jesus, there might have been a whole bunch of other people. We know from history that a lot of times as people would travel, sometimes the mean people in town would go out and watch the executions. They would throw rocks at the guys hanging on the crosses. They would yell at them. All kinds. We know what happened to Jesus, right? We read about that, how they spat on him, how people hollered at him and said, if you're the Son of God, come on down from. Guys, listen, I know the crucifixion of Jesus is very special to us who believe in him, but during that day and time, he was just another guy hanging there. There were people all up and down that road throwing rocks, hollering insults, and all kinds of things at these guys dying on crosses. There might have been some family members out there. It would have been kind of scary to be out there because usually if somebody in your family, a loved one, was convicted as a criminal to be executed, you had to break association with them because you didn't want to get arrested too. But all of this is going on out there. Sometimes when we follow Jesus, and if we're in the right place next to Jesus, sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, right? Some of y'all probably had those experiences where you've been around people and things and you've had to make the right decision for Jesus and it was uncomfortable. It was hard to do. But that's part of being a follower the way Mary Magdalene was. I want to jump a little bit too. Jesus is crucified now. Now let's jump and finish up here by going to the 3rd day. Resurrection Day that we celebrate on Easter. And Mary Magdalene had a personal encounter with Jesus again. Stay in John, flip to John chapter 20, but first I want to read just one quick verse out of Mark chapter 16, verse 9, that says this. Mark 16, verse 9 tells us something I said earlier. When he arose on the first day of the week, he appeared first to who? Mary Magdalene. So the Bible, when I said earlier she was the first person to see the resurrected Jesus, that wasn't me making that up. That's in Scripture. Mark chapter 16 says, the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. Okay, so Mark says she was first. John tells us how it happened. So in John chapter 20, we're going to look at the details of this first person encounter. She's the first person to have a close encounter with Jesus after he's resurrected. That was probably pretty cool, right? It's one thing to have a close encounter with Jesus and to walk with him and talk with him like she got to all these 3 years when he was in ministering. But she's the first one to see him when he was resurrected. And she's gone down in history as the first person to see the resurrected Jesus. And John tells us how it happened, okay? John chapter 20, the first 2 verses say this. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've laid him." First thing I want us to see here is Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early. She came there early. Now that'd be a perfect place for me to jump in here and say, you know what that says? That means you should get up early every morning and read your Bible. But I can't tell you that because you know what? I can't do that. I am not a morning person. I've tried to be one of those people that get up. Are any of you those kind of people? Or any of you the wake up in the morning people and you have quiet time or something? Some of you are? Oh, good. I'm glad there's that kind of people because Mary Magdalene was one. I'm not. Man, it would be, for me to get up and start reading my Bible first thing in the morning would be a waste because I wouldn't remember what I'd read. Okay? But the part I want you to see is not necessarily the getting up early in the morning. I want this to jump back to number 2. If we're going to have close encounters with Jesus, we have to be intentional. She set her alarm clock to get up early in the morning and go. She made a plan, right? Remember we talked about that earlier. She made a plan. Okay. So let's jump a few verses. What happens next? We said, she saw the tomb was open, so she ran back and told the disciples. Peter and John, they run. We'll skip reading all that, but Peter and John run to the tomb. They find it's empty. They go in and look, and then they head back, and Mary stays. Okay, get the picture? Mary went and told the disciples. They're all together, but Peter and John are the only 2 that run back to the tomb. She follows them. So now it's Peter and John and Mary are at the tomb. Peter and John look in. They don't find Jesus. They head back. Mary stays. She stayed at the tomb. Okay? Now jump to verse 11. And let's see what happened. So now Mary's at the tomb by herself. Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. So she's still there. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. At this point, she's not looked in yet, has she? But now she does. She stoops. We know Peter and John looked in, but now she looks in. And when she looked in, she saw something that Peter and John didn't see. She saw 2 angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. How did she know that was where Jesus' body had laid? She'd been there before. Remember when they took his body? She followed and watched Joseph and Arimathea. She watched where the tomb they put him in and watched where they laid him. So she knew where to look. Okay, one at the head, one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them, "They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she didn't know that it was Jesus. I don't know. Some people, I've heard all kinds of presumptions about why didn't she recognize him? Did Jesus somehow disguise himself to her at that point? Was she weeping and crying? It says she was weeping and stuff. She wept. Girls, this is not picking on you because I've seen guys do the same thing. Have you ever seen somebody just cry and weep so hard they can't see? Have any of you been there and done that? Yeah, I'll admit, I'm a guy. There's been times in my life I've cried so hard, whether happy or sad. Sometimes when I get tickled and laugh, I cry. Any of y'all do that? When you laugh, you cry? Sometimes I've laughed and cried that I can't see. Things are fuzzy. We don't know why she didn't recognize Jesus. Maybe it was because of the tears. Maybe Jesus kind of was standing in the shadows. Maybe he supernaturally disguised himself. I don't know. But anyway, she didn't recognize him. But Jesus said to her, oh, it already said, well, woman, why are you weeping? She didn't know it was Jesus. Verse 15, Jesus said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Who are you looking for? She, supposing him to be the gardener. So she thought, okay, here's this guy. He must work in the garden where Jesus is buried. This was a garden. So she thought he was a gardener. She said to him, sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and then I'll take him. I'll take him away. She's like, if y'all have taken him out, his body, and people think that's kind of weird. What would it be? Well, once again, historically, that day and time, it wouldn't have been unheard of if this was a rich man's tomb for people to rob the tomb, to look for, to see if sometimes they would wrap up the body with belongings and jewelry and stuff. So somebody may have robbed the tomb. She's thinking maybe that, or maybe this rich guy decided he wanted his tomb back. So after the burial and stuff, they took his body out and he still has room in the tomb for more people. Okay? Don't know exactly what she's thinking, but she's kind of saying, look, if you've taken his body out of the tomb and y'all aren't going to let him stay here, let me take him. I'll take him away. I'll take his body and find a place to bury him, is what she's saying. 16, Jesus said to her, Mary. He called her by name. They had a relationship, didn't they? He called her by name, Mary. And she turned and said to him, and for some reason it says in Aramaic. I don't know what they were speaking at this point before, whether it was Hebrew and now she's speaking. But in Aramaic it says she calls him Rabboni, which is the word for teacher. We know Jesus was considered a rabbi. You've heard that term, right? The name Rabboni means master teacher. It's like the difference between a high school teacher and a college professor type thing. This is like the doctorate person. Rabboni means a master teacher, okay? Jesus said to her, so she recognizes him now. And Jesus says to her, don't cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. And a lot of people get that mixed. A lot of people have heard and said, he's saying, don't touch me, don't touch me. That's not what he said. He said what? Don't cling to me. Don't hold on to me. I'm sure Mary, when she recognized him, she probably fell at his feet and grabbed his feet. She may have hugged him, whatever. But Jesus saying, look, I don't need you to hold on to me right now. There's something I need you to do, and there's something I still have to do. Don't hold on to me. I've got to go somewhere, and you do too. Don't cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord, and that he had said these things to her. Now that's the last verse I have on there. Remember the guy in the video earlier? You remember that guy telling his friends he'd seen Jesus? And what was his friend making fun of him for? Did he believe him? No. The next verse, I didn't put it up there. Oh, it's not on that. It's not in that one. It's back in the book of Luke, or Mark. It's in the book of Mark. It says after Mary Magdalene and the women told them that they had seen Jesus, guess what? They didn't believe. They didn't believe her. They didn't believe what she said. But Mary Magdalene put herself in the right place, didn't she? She put herself in the right place to have this close encounter with Jesus. She knew that following Jesus sometimes meant going to some hard places. Now she's at the cross. That's the hardest place. And now at his tomb. That's hard. He's dead. Now he's gone. So we know that being around Jesus puts us in some hard places. And by that, I don't just mean physical places either. Sometimes emotionally it's hard, right? We mentioned that earlier. Sometimes you're in situations that are hard, where you're called on to be close to Jesus. But that's the right place to be, is next to Jesus, to be in the right place. Sometimes Mary Magdalene and the other disciples hanging around Jesus, it was really great and cool. Like maybe, I bet it was really cool to be around Jesus when he was doing things like miracles and healing people. When he was taking a little boy's lunch and feeding thousands of people with it. That was probably cool. It was probably pretty cool to be around Jesus when he was casting out demons out of people and stuff. That was probably neat to be around him at other times. So it was really, really great. There might have been times when it wasn't so great. There might have been times when it was kind of uncomfortable. Like the times, when maybe the religious leaders are harassing Jesus and stuff. Maybe that's uncomfortable times it is to be around Jesus. Sometimes it might have even been downright scary to be around Jesus. There were times the disciples were really scared, like a couple of times in a boat when a storm came up, right? And they're afraid the boat's going to sink and that they're going to die. And so it's kind of scary to be hanging around Jesus at those times, but then Jesus takes over, right? There were life-threatening times like when he was arrested and crucified. We've already talked about that. And you know what? It's the same with us, that there's sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's easy and cool to be with a Christ follower, be around Jesus, sometimes it's hard. But there are situations that put us in the right place to have close encounters with Jesus. So, what situations are you putting yourself in? Are you putting yourself in the right places to have encounters with Jesus? I'd say, like this is one of those right places, right? Sunday mornings in church is one of those right places. That's easy. What are some of those other right places? Think through that. Jesus, where during the week, where in my life can I put myself in the right places? Physically right places, but also emotional right places, relationship, friend-wise right places. I guess maybe the bigger question might be, are we sometimes putting ourselves in the wrong places? Are we putting ourselves in situations sometimes where there's no way we're going to have an encounter with Jesus? This is the wrong place. Jesus isn't going to show up here. Maybe I'm around the wrong people or doing the wrong things or the wrong kind of atmospheres going on. I'm watching the wrong things or I'm listening to the wrong things or talking about the wrong things. Those are places you're not going to have a close encounter with Jesus, right? We have to put ourselves in the right places. So, finish up tonight. We see that Mary Magdalene had a close encounter with Jesus that changed her life, and she became one of his closest followers. And she continued to have close encounters with Jesus. Why? Well, because she was invested, she was intentional, and she was in the right places. And I want you to think about that with your life. I don't know where you're at in your relationship with God. Some of you may be like Mary Magdalene. You may have already had that first encounter with Jesus. And you may be thinking, I want to have more encounters with Jesus. I'd love to have an encounter, close encounter with Jesus every day. How can I make that happen? Well, be invested in the things of Jesus. Your time, your talent, your energies, treasures, all of those things. Am I investing in Jesus? Be intentional. Make plans. If I want to have a close encounter with Jesus, maybe I don't need to put it all on Jesus and say, Jesus, I need you to bump into me sometime today. Maybe I need to make plans and say, I'm making this plan. I'm going to bump into Jesus. I'm going to go looking for him. I'm going to find him. Make a plan every day, every week to have a close encounter with him. And be in those right places. I'm going to put myself in the right places that I know Jesus is going to show up. It may be hard places, may be uncomfortable places, but I'm going to put myself in the right places with the right people at the right times, doing the right things so that I can have close encounters with Jesus. If you're one of those people who've already had a close encounter with Jesus, the thing for us tonight is to look at it and say, I want to have more close encounters, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to be invested, be intentional, and be in the right places. Somebody in here tonight, you may have not had that first close encounter with Jesus. Well, I can go ahead and tell you, man, you are in the right place to make that happen if you wanted to tonight. And I'm going to be hanging around. I'd love to talk to you about that, or some of these other people would love to. If maybe you say, I want to have that close encounter with Jesus right now. Guys, I've enjoyed being here with you tonight, sharing with you. Okay? I'm going to pray for you. Then we're going to do, I think, the normal things to clean up and stuff, and then hang out, play games, whatever y'all want to do. But as we pray and as we finish up tonight, I hope that through this series that Pastor Darren's had you with, I hope that's got you curious and really desiring to have close encounters with Jesus. Not just accidentally bump into him sometime, but every day, Jesus, I am going to invest in you. I'm going to be intentional, and I'm going to be in those right places because I want to see you. I want to run into you every day, Jesus. I don't want to see you in a tree trunk or in my toast or my banana. I want to see you inside my life. Okay? Let me pray for you. Father,
You're calling me over. You're pulling me close with love.